What is our story? Reflecting on the account of the origins of the Passover, which was our Old Testament reading this morning, is a great privilege. This event and the retelling of it has given identity and sustenance to an extraordinary people for over 2,500 years. It holds a special place in the Jewish calendar, marking the first month of the year and providing a celebration which unites and binds family life in common purpose and belief. Our Eucharist does the same for us, and week in and week out we celebrate the joy and wonder of our story, rooted in the Jesus of our Passover and the new story we have to tell. We are surrounded by story. A word which seems to have become more frequent in Western conversation is the word narrative. People talk about the narrative we or they work from. Other words which are used almost synonymously are worldview or paradigm, our particular social, historical, and cultural spectacles through which we observe the world around us and understand our position within it. It is an acknowledgement that we operate out of histories, out of our stories. Narrative therapy is the use of story to bring about healing and hope in people traumatized and marginalized. A friend, Glynis Clackerty, worked with refugee children and used story to help them begin to engage with their identities and worth, and to find some self-belief from the horrors of abandonment. She wrote a book called The Suitcase Children. The suitcase symbolized their homelessness, but it became the vehicle to articulate their lives. They created collages on the inside and outside of the cases. Outside was their physical journey. Inside, the collages depicted their interior and emotional story. Being able to articulate personal experience within the context of a ring of caring people, over time, begins to allow that which is life-giving to emerge again. A sense of trust and permanence, and the flicker of hope which comes from being listened to and not rejected. The use of personal story for healing and new beginnings. Today marks the beginning of this year's season of creation, a season still voluntary in its appropriation and liturgical use, but which many communities have taken up. Its existence is a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the world around us and to think conscientiously about our planet. At the same time, the season is introduced because human beings have only very recently begun to wake up to the impact of their footprint and the degradation of the planet. An organization which I have followed is the Pachamama Alliance, an organization created to support and give voice within the Western and developed world to South American indigenous people. These people have a very simple question. They say, our home are the forests, they are our brothers and sisters, and we live together. This is our story. And they ask the Western world, what is your story? The season of creation can be a wonderful time to think through this question. Daniel Quinn is a philosopher-writer whose thinking I have found interesting and helpful in challenging me about some of the basic assumptions within my personal story. And there's one basic assumption which lies at the heart of our ecological perspective. The book Daniel Quinn is best known for is called Ishmael, It is a relatively dry book to read because it is essentially dialogue, but nonetheless fun in its concept. It is the story of a young man, somewhat disillusioned with life, who comes across an advertisement in a newspaper. The advertisement reads, "Teacher seeks pupil willing to learn to save the world." Initially, the young man treats it with some disdain, but eventually decides to see what it is about. He arrives at the given apartment address and to his surprise discovers the occupant is a gorilla whose name is Ishmael. Ishmael has learned to speak telepathically. His story is that he was rescued from captivity in a zoo by a Jewish Holocaust survivor who has since died. It was through his rescuer and benefactor that he learned to converse telepathically. Daniel Quinn explores the myths and stories which hold us in captivity to certain ways of thinking and action, and especially the narratives and stories that hold us and lead us to commit ourselves in judging and hurting others. For instance, the anti-Semitism of Nazi fascism. I'm sure he would include the apartheid that so many of us unquestionably grew up with, and I imagine the white supremacy of his America. He divides people into two groups, leavers and takers. The leavers would be what the takers would understand as primitive, but are the ones who live with and alongside nature. The takers are the developers and exploiters. Be that as it may, you need to read the book. But there's one premise which Ishmael pushes the young man toward, who has indeed become his pupil, and which he wants the young man to discover for himself. It is an enormous intellectual struggle for the young man, but eventually he sees where Ishmael is leading him, and it dawns on him the sudden basic premise which governs so much of human behavior toward the created world. And he blurts out, "Man," he says, "is superior to all other creatures." It is an assumption which lies just below the surface of our self-understanding, unquestioned, because we are or have been such a successful species. It is an assumption which has much to do with the degradation of the planet. The environment, in fact, is not the problem. It is humankind. Until we get to grips with our anthropocentric mindset, our human-centeredness, the environment will always be subject to a certain disregard. Just as androcentric assumptions, such as patriarchy, result in the degradation of women, or ethnocentricity, the superiority of one culture over another, results in racism, so our anthropocentric attitudes threaten the planet and the extraordinary biodiversity. Perhaps a positive to the COVID-19 epidemic, which has caused global communities to shut down their normal ways of life, even our economies, is that it has helped us to see how much we pollute and influence negatively the health and wellness of the planet. I've heard more than one comment on how the skies seem to be clearer and the atmosphere cleaner. Human impact is extensive. Scientists, or those who have responsibilities for the geological timelines of the planet, now call this era the Anthropocene. the age of humankind. Because the human footprint and its impact is so evident in the many spheres that make up our planet. The atmosphere, the air we breathe, the biosphere where life exists and of which we speak now of a sixth extinction. The hydrosphere, our oceans, lakes and streams, and the ice caps and glaciers melting so rapidly as a result of human-induced climate change. The pedosphere, where we walk and ignorantly denude the planet of the delicate film of topsoils, which take thousands of years to form. And even the lithosphere, the rocks and strata beneath our feet, where we mine and extract many of the mineral resources we take for granted. The mountains we chop away. The myth which governs our blindness is the unarticulated assumption that we are superior to all other creatures. We are centered on ourselves. And until we realize that and respond to the community of life around us with new humility and respect, the trajectory is not promising. The Church has a huge role to play in all of this. Certainly there are activist roles to be played and a variety of exploitations to be challenged, both at the local and global level. We do need to be outspoken and critical and to exercise our prophetic voice. But simply to call our communities to recognize the sacred quality of creation is a vital task and not an onerous one. It is a spiritual task and motivated by the extraordinary beauty of creation. I believe it is the responsibility of faith communities to go out and touch the earth, to reconnect with its sacramental, sacred qualities. During lockdown, I participated with some friends in the study of a book called Soul of a Pilgrim. The author speaks of her response to the ecological world and what nature does spiritually for her. She writes about being saved by beauty over and over again. The Church is in a wonderful position to be able to grow that narrative, so that, as Thomas Berry says, humanity can live with nature in a mutually beneficial way. Our Eucharistic story reminds us, as we gather to celebrate the gift of love and mercy, which we know in the risen Christ, is that always we can begin again. I do hope that your season of creation will be an opportunity to reflect deeply on your relationship with the earth and to explore that story all over again. Amen.